Good morning, everyone. Happy Thursday and welcome to our Teach and Learn. As always, we'll give our attendees another minute or two to join, but not as always. I have a small game for you to play today instead of just staring at the screen for 1 minute. We have a lot of attendees today, and here's actually a question. And WiscNet staff, I know there are quite a few of you on this call. You're not allowed to play this game, so control yourselves. The question is, there are a lot of attendees, as I mentioned, but one person in particular is not here today. It's quite obvious probably by now that it's my partner in crime, Michaela, and no worries, she's on a vacation. But the question is, and whoever answers it first in a chat will get a prize. Where did Michaela go? Which state is she relaxing now? Where is she enjoying some sun? Whoever answers first will get a small prize. Soaking up the sun, possibly swimming in Pacific Ocean. Good guess, but not Florida. Not California. And I know WiscNet employees are probably me. Hawaii, Nathaniel. That's correct. And you are getting a prize from us, which is a purple sweater with WiscNet logo on it, much like the one I'm wearing right now. For the rest of you, do not worry, because today is a sneak preview of our merchandise that we are getting ready for our annual WiscNet Connections Conference that will take place on May 13-14 at the beautiful Monona Terrace here in Madison, Wisconsin. And all our attendees and members that attend that conference will be able to get the sweater as long as some other cool things. So we hope to see all of you there, and it's just not for cool WiscNet swag, but also to listen to our amazing speakers, to meet us face to face, because WiscNet is a small organization, just 20 of us, and we'll learn a great deal every time we are talking to you. To taste great food, and the most important thing, to share your knowledge with your colleagues from across the state, because networking is very important. So I hope we'll see you there. Don't be strangers. And now, when important stuff is done with, we're moving on to even more important stuff, to today's Teach and Learn. And I'm excited and happy to introduce our speakers today. We have our good friend Bill Nash from CISA. He'll be updating us on how things are with CISA and answering a lot of your questions that were submitted upon the registration. Thank you to all of you who helped us to shape this presentation into what it will be today. And we're looking forward to this great conversation. And I would like to introduce Eric Franco with Cyber Response Team of Wisconsin, which is also known as CRT. He'll update us on cyber security landscape of the state, and also answer a lot of questions that were submitted by our membership. Without further ado, Bill, Eric, gentlemen, take it away.
All right. Eric, would you like me to go with my intro and such first?
By all means. Yeah,
okay.
Thank you.
So good morning, everyone. And apologies if I sound a little funny. I got a little bit of a head cold going on. But Bill Nash with the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. The thing that we bring to the table is really, first of all, Cybersecurity Advisor assigned to Wisconsin. So I'm here for you. I also have my partner, Dan Honore, who couldn't make it today because he's actually helping out at K-12 in northern Wisconsin as we speak. But the two of us cover the entire state. We're here for anything you need cyber related. We can connect you to all the great CISA resources that we'll talk a little bit more about today, as well as we have good relationships with Eric and our friends over at the Wisconsin Cyber Response Team, the State Fusion Center, our FBI partners, if there's something that you need, we can probably find somebody that can help you, would be the bottom line. And then also just a side note, in addition to me and Dan, we have two other folks assigned to Wisconsin that are protective security advisors. So if you guys need anything physical security related, such as active shooter training or de-escalation training, or perhaps bombing prevention, or just an assessment of your facility, those guys can help with that as well. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Eric to talk a little bit about himself.
Okay, thank you. Like Bill said, my name is Eric Franco. I work for Wisconsin Emergency Management. My role here at WEM is the Cybersecurity Preparedness Coordinator. So for the most part, my role is to, as an all hazards emergency management person, for lack of a better word, apply what we do for natural disasters and other human-made disasters that are typical with what a person would affiliate with what WEM does, but apply it in the cyber threatscape, so to speak. Interestingly enough, FEMA has identified cybersecurity as a technical / human-made hazard for the last 20 years. But really hadn't any additional guidance or information to frame what that looks like until November this last year, when they released their guidance for emergency managers. The reason why I want to bring that up is the idea of cybersecurity historically has been relegated to either IT, business, or a criminal type of incident. And one of the major trends that we're seeing across the country is cybersecurity being integrated into more of the traditional emergency management activities. It's also caused quite a stir because, for the most part, because of the relegation that I just mentioned, it also means that there really aren't a lot of subject matter experts of cybersecurity embedded within an emergency management enterprise. So my role is to try to help socialize cybersecurity as an all hazards planning activity and help broker the relationship statewide with emergency management planning, resources and support. And then an ancillary duty of mine is to direct the activities of the Wisconsin Cyber Response Team, which is an all-volunteer network of IT professionals, cybersecurity architects, cybersecurity analysts, data forensics professionals, and really, in a manner not too different from our community emergency response teams, or our incident management teams, or our other volunteer organizations that are active in disasters, to really try to congeal those activities with an emergency management flavor. We currently have 477 persons on our roster, which includes both general members as well as around 150 incident responders. The two primary missions of the CRT is incident response, which also entails the training piece and assessments piece, but also for the general membership, it provides a lot of information sharing resources so that we're able to socialize among the membership. The idea that, through the use of our Slack channel and the very proactive pushing of latest cybersecurity news and trends and resources and training, et cetera, we're able to try to get ahead of certain types of incidents before they become catastrophic, throughout the state. That's easier said than done. And I think for the most part, what I'm thankful for with the cyber response team is we have such a large number of folks who are passionate about volunteering their knowledge and their expertise to serve the public sector critical infrastructure. So the cyber response team serves government, public sector institutions such as municipalities, counties, tribal governments, school districts in particular, which is our primary customer, if you will, but also public water utilities and in our charter, we were able to have our attorney at the Department of Military Affairs sign off on any CISA designated critical infrastructure. So while we focus largely on the public sector, depending on the critical infrastructure that might be requiring our support, we can even support some of the for-profit entities, specifically when we look at the healthcare um, uh, sector. So that's kind of the nutshell about the CRT. I don't know if any of you are I don't see the list of persons on the call, but if any of you are interested in joining the cyber response team as a general member or even potentially as an incident responder, I'll put my email in the chat and feel free to reach out to me and I can provide some additional information for that.
Hey, Eric, would you like me to paste in the just a little blurb and including the um, web link as
Yeah,
well
that'd be great.
as the duty officer number, perhaps?
Absolutely.
Okay, doing that right now.
Appreciate it.
Oh, shoot, and the link didn't paste. That's not like them. See if I can copy the hyperlink and see if that looks better.
So while
Never
Bill's
said I
doing
was a
that,
smart man.
I
I did that.
Bill, would you like me to just talk about some of the threats and trends that we're currently?
Oh yeah, I think we had a lot of good questions
Yeah.
that were asked ahead of time on that. So yeah, if you want to start with that,
Okay.
especially some of the recent incidents that we've had, and then one of the couple of the things that were asked about were for things coming up this next year, like the presidential election and the RNC. So why don't you lead off, and then I can tag in with
Okay.
some of that additional information.
So what's interesting is if I don't know if anyone was able to see the congressional testimony that Jen Easterly, the director of CISA, and the FBI director, Christopher Wray, and a couple of other folks provided a couple of weeks ago. I want to just mention that because if you haven't seen it, it's available on YouTube, and there's a lot of good information that a lot of those principles provided. And what I can tell you is that in terms of a lot of the activities that we're seeing in the state, it aligns very tightly with what they mentioned and provided to the Congress. That being said, we're seeing a lot of activity with business email compromises. The most common attack vector at this juncture appears to be really three things. One, phishing. And I know that seems like a real basic, like, well, duh, you don't click on links, etc. But the sophistication underlying a lot of the um, threat actors' phishing lures have grown in their sophistication. In some cases, aided by generative AI, allowing for the authenticity of the email to be virtually identical to a trusted agent within an organization. And that's consistent with a lot of the other types of trends that we've seen as well with uh, different types of scripting that might allow for infiltration into certain types of hardware that might not be patched. And that really falls in line with some of the threat actors who may not have the level of sophistication that some of the tier one threat actors might have, but the use of generative AI to provide some of those, I guess you could call it support tools for so-called script kiddies, has widened the aperture for the potential threat actors' abilities to do what they do. Another piece that's also continuing to show up in several different news feeds that was first released open source back in, I think it was April of 23 of last year. But it's the Volt Typhoon activities, which is a Chinese threat actor group. And what we're seeing, despite some of the crackdown that the federal government's been able to impose, there's open source reporting that suggests that they've infiltrated deeper than what was originally believed. So just this morning, I put in our Slack channel just some basic resources, again, to reiterate to network owners the proactive and actionable measures that they can do to try to assess their networks, as well as to try to mitigate some of those threats. But, again, it goes back to a lot of and going back to what Jen Easterly mentioned, about 90%, approximately 90% of the threat actors' threat surface could be reduced by just basic cyber hygiene. So the cyber response team has a booklet that we send out to folks, just basic best practices for cyber hygiene. And I mean, there's an abundance of those types of resources available by a lot of different vendors. But, passphrases, long passphrases, different types of password policies that ensure that, stagnant passwords aren't able to be reused. MFA patching. I mean, the list goes on. We can certainly provide WiscNet folks some of those materials that we're mentioning, but it goes back to the trends, ransomware, business email compromises, compromising legacy hardware and legacy systems. So I know it's easier said than done to replace legacy hardware and software. But especially when you're looking at the public sector, which from just a policy and administrative standpoint is really 19th, 20th century ways of doing business, and the threat actors are outpacing our current ability to pivot. And I think that, if nothing else, is the main message I'd like to just impart to you all, is that if you have a policy or a procedure or some aspect of your business unit that is seemingly sluggish for pivoting to our rapidly changing climate, it might be a good idea to try to have some of the higher level decision makers to figure out ways to make it easier for your businesses, your schools, or your stakeholders to pivot. Because one of the things that that Jennifer Easterly mentioned during her congressional testimony was that the generative AI, as it's related to aiding the threat actors, is 3 times that of Moore's law. So again, if you're looking at 18 months for processing speeds to double, if generative AI is 3 times that in terms of its ability to learn and find an attack surface, that's a significant disadvantage that we have, right? But Christopher Ray also mentioned that just looking at the Chinese threat actors themselves, and this is related to Volt Typhoon and some other groups as well, that if you took all of the United States cybersecurity resources, personnel, we were outnumbered 50-1. So what that also, I think blatantly communicates is that, we're behind before we can even necessarily get ahead. So what can we do as a cyber response team to help support the statewide risk reduction mission? What can CISA do to help our state and local stakeholders in that particular venture? What can you all as network owners do, to assist in that statewide risk reduction? And what can WiscNet do to help promote some of those? So I think there's definitely a lot of interconnectivity to cast a wide net of information and mutual support. The question is, what structures do we have in place to help facilitate that? And what structures do we currently have in place that actually stymie progress in that regard? So, I think the latest trends that we're seeing is what I previously mentioned, but also the acceleration at which they're becoming increasingly sophisticated. I don't know, Bill, did you have anything
Well,
to maybe
yeah,
add?
so thanks for that, Eric, and especially thanks for covering the items that Director Easterly had said, because she is a very wise person. But to tag off of what you said about business email compromise, one of the things that I want to add a little side note to is what we see is impersonation to make that inroad. Because it all boils down to social engineering, and they're going to use email, they're going to use phone, they're going to use text. We even had the recent incident where the perpetrators were sending a fax to schools saying that, hey, pay this bill to cover the charges that CISA has for your CISA scanning, which, by the way, CISA doesn't charge for anything. So if you get that fax, just throw it away. Bunches of people have been getting it. But the perpetrators will do impersonation, but they'll also do that piece where they'll get in by social engineering, getting a account and password to an email for somebody that you might trust. And it could be in your organization, or it could be a third party that you work with. And then their email is compromised and being logged into by the perpetrators. So it's going to come from a legitimate email address in that case. With impersonation, at least it's different, so you might be able to detect that. However, they do silly things like, oh, they switch a 1 for an L, so it looks really close, so you miss it right in the name, so it looks very similar. So they'll do a lot of things to trick you. But that said, essentially what they try to do is they establish a relationship with you that's trusted. They work with you a little bit, and then after they've built that trust, then they'll say, oh, hey, I need to change my direct deposit information, or I need to have you pay this invoice, but do it to this bank account now instead of the previous one. Sometimes they'll even jump in on an email thread that you've already been engaged with the person on. So because they have access to that person's email box, they might reply to a thread just to make it more believable. So just be wary of that. And like Eric said, that is one of the most common things we're seeing. And then secondarily, once they've social engineered their way in, either they're going to try to do that, get money out of you directly that way, or the other thing that Eric pointed out was they'll try to exploit some of the vulnerabilities you have. And a little later on, we'll talk a little bit more about what things we have that might help you with that. But keeping things patched and up to date is really, really important in that aspect. And I'll pay a little bit later. I'll paste in some links to some things that will help with that. But that's the biggest things. And Eric, I think another one, just to throw it out there because they had asked about incidents that we've seen. How many schools have we had this year that have had their HVAC compromised, which led to their network being compromised? Was it 3?
I think it was 3. Yeah.
Yeah. So watch out for those third-party vendors, especially if they are doing remote access to administer their equipment that they're supporting for you. That's a big one. So if they're, especially if it's just plain old open RDP, so remote desktop protocol, get that shut down. At least put a VPN in front of it. Better if you can do the multi-factor authentication, and segment it from the rest of your network too. So have some ACLs blocking it from talking to other things on your network, because once they get into one device, they can spread rapidly. Although dwell times are up, I got to say that we've seen perpetrators hanging in the network undetected for one organization I was talking with was a month and a half. And so if, be wary of that as well, because they like to see what data they can steal before they encrypt everything.
Mm-hmm. A couple things just to piggyback off of that too. We've had incidents over the last year where the network owner didn't really have a lot of log files that we were able to use to identify the actual patient zero, so to speak, or to establish a timeline, which again, when you look at resources, if you're having to compile logs, large volumes of log files, and it becomes Groundhog Day, let's say 3 months into it, and you know you don't have the money to continue to either purchase drives or to get additional cloud space for these large volumes of data that you know in a blue sky world would never have to really go and dig into. That one event where you do have to get into them and you realize that your logs are only 48 hours old, that really isn't going to do you a lot of good, especially if the threat actor infiltrated your system 6 months ago, which we're talking about some of the Volt Typhoon living in the wild scenarios. We're looking at threat actors that may have been on certain systems for up to a year or more. So at what point, do you factor in, okay, I'm okay with having a backup that's a year old, and if we had to go back to this last known good, we might lose, functional data or business data. But I mean, in terms of resilience, to what level of of just for lack of a better word, pain are you okay with versus being completely deadlined and having all of your data encrypted? So what I'm trying to say is with logging, MFA, those are force multipliers in terms of ensuring that your resilience during your recovery, would allow for you to be, be back up and not have as much operational lost time.
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to mention is that, especially with the generative AI, we did a tabletop with a county last spring. And in preparation for this tabletop, um, myself and a couple of other people looked at their county website, looked at their sheriff's office website and Facebook page, um, and the amount of data that was available to socially engineer a phishing email um, was just I was actually surprised the amount of information, personal identifiable information. And um, there may be local statutes that require certain information to be publicly available. Um, you go to a school district website and you've got a lot of information that a threat actor could use to pose as someone that you might, have a trusted relationship with, within the context of your, professional duties. That being said, uh, where is that line that you can draw that allows you to make information publicly available by the so-called analog or paper types of requests versus what is available electronically? And that, I think what's important about that particular topic is just because you can post something online doesn't necessarily mean that it's in the best interest of of your organization. Um, we had a couple of folks that I work with and myself use Chat GPT to, within 10 minutes, compile a targeting list for critical infrastructure. Um, so in terms of how that as a tool can be used to assist threat actors, it might take 2 weeks to compile that same list by, um, intelligence analysts in a traditional analysis and control element. So it's important to understand, I think, that we don't always know the information that is able to be scraped by generative AI because it's able to find data that people don't even realize is being published on the internet. So having some sort of information control plan, I think, is something that organizations may not have had to take as seriously as I think we're starting to see now. Um, and so there's just one thing just to bring your attention to. And so some of that might be reports on student activities. It might be publicly made information that's made publicly available about groups or about extracurricular activities, teachers' names, administrators, information. I mean, a lot of different things that could be seemingly harmless, but when people fuse that into an email through a social engineering attempt, it becomes much more believable. Um, the other part about that I think is important to consider, and Bill touched on this too. We had an incident with a police department where the phishing email was convincing enough to the police chief to up to a certain point, and that certain point was it was a departure of moving money from one account to a different account. Their internal procedure required a wedding signature to be hand delivered to their finance department head, and so the police chief actually went to that department head and asked about it, and she said, "Well, I didn't send this email to you." That was the only thing that saved that particular police department from not losing a substantial amount of money. By contrast, we had a second incident by another police department, same type of incident, where they actually did lose money because they didn't have that so-called analog procedure internally in place. So again, going back to this idea of just because something can be made in your process or your workflow digital doesn't necessarily mean that it's in the best interest of your organization. So just take that for as food for thought when thinking about your own internal procedures and how to mitigate the threat surface.
Hey, Eric, is it all right if we back up for a second just to the mention that you made about logging?
Oh, sure.
If you guys have an incident and you want assistance with response, even if it's not from the Wisconsin Cyber Response Team, if it's from a vendor, they're going to want a few things. One is they're going to want your network diagram, and the others are going to want logs. And if you don't have those, it's going to make figuring out what happened difficult. And figuring out what happened is really important, because if you don't close the hole before you start the recovery, you could just end up being back in trouble again very quickly. So, what Eric said about logging and then also the having that network diagram are two really useful pieces of information. CISA recently came out with a tool. If you don't have something to keep your logs, CISA came out with a tool that you can use called Logging Made Easy, and I've pasted that in the chat so that folks can grab that if they want to. It's just one option. There's many options. But the important part is that you're doing something with your logs, not just leaving them on the server that is the source of them. So like, don't leave it on your domain controller, don't leave it on your firewall, because there's two problems with that. One is usually there's not enough space to keep enough to go back far enough when an incident happens. And then the second thing that happens is the perpetrator likely has found their way in and can either erase, modify, or encrypt that information, so then it's not useful to you. So shipping it off to a log management server somewhere that's protected, is using different credentials than everything else that you do. Just secure it and lock it down just like it's your backups. Sorry, Eric, I just wanted to throw that in there because that is one of the things when responding to incidents that becomes really critically important.
Mm-hmm.
And, if folks want to use the Logging Made Easy, that is one option. There are commercial products out there for that. Even if you're just going to set up a plain old syslog server and store them there and not do alerts off of it, at least you've got the logs. That's a really important step.
Bill, what other resources and support does CISA offer for especially small school districts? But I know that WiscNet's wider than just school districts. But if I was a network owner, why would I want to get in touch with you or Dan?
So, well, let's start with, I'll paste the link to our K-12 resources in here just because I suspect there's a few K-12 folks online. We have a toolkit that I just pasted a link to in the chat. There's a report out there for what cyber looks like in schools, etc. Great resource. It hits a lot of the same things that we have in other pieces of our website as well. But there are a lot of things that Dan and I can connect you to beyond that too. So we have assessments that we can do. Which is what Dan is actually doing today with a school district up in northern Wisconsin. And I was till I jumped over to this call. But that can be helpful to help you just determine where you're at in your cybersecurity program and where you might want to go next. It's a good starting point. We also have some services like our CISA scanning, which this is one I just tell people you should just sign up for it. What this boils down to is we provide the same thing that the perpetrators are doing on a regular basis. So they're scanning you every day to see what your weaknesses are. We do that same thing, except for instead of exploiting it like they do when they see a weakness, we actually just give you a weekly report that you can use to then try to address those issues. And I'll just actually put a little blurb in here along with the email, and I'll paste that in the chat because this is something you can sign up for easily just by sending an email to the email address that I'm putting in the chat here.
Now, Bill,
And
if I were to sign up for CISA, is that like an annual subscription that's free, or is it like indefinite?
it's an indefinite until you tell us to stop.
Okay.
And you can change the IP addresses. It's only a scan of your external IP address spaces. So, it's not intrusive. It's not a credentialed scan. It's just hey, what's vulnerable at these IP addresses that are facing the internet? If something new shows up, that can be a good alert to you. Dan said when he was getting it for the village that he worked for previously, he had something pop up that was a surprise to him. And so he was able to address it quickly. So that can be a good thing. If it's coming up as a clean report, it gives you a little confidence that, hey, we're a little better off than some organizations are, because at least you know that there's nothing dangerous facing the internet. If you want more information on it, I can also give you this link here, which describes it a little bit better, but I think the best way to describe it is just what I said, which is we're doing just what the perpetrators do. We just don't exploit it. I'll just paste that there quick. And sorry for that, I'm not a good multitasker. But in addition to that, so the CISA is a big one. The assessments with Dan, but also if you put your incident response plan together, Eric mentioned a little bit on that already. We also have our tabletop exercises from CISA that, Dan and I can assist. Eric actually and others from DMA can assist with this, or WEM can assist with this as well. But at the end of the day, we've got both cyber and physical packages that are out on our website that you're more than welcome to go use. If you want help using them, just reach out to any of us and we're happy to help you with that. They are about a 90% solution is what I would say. And you can go right to this link and see what they are. You have to customize them to fit your organization, of course, but Dan or I or others from CISA can help you with that. Eric's even good at helping with those things. We can help facilitate them. Our national team will actually create something custom for you if you want. We can put in a request for that. Bottom line here is reach out and we can help you test your plans. It works really good. We've done it for a few school districts where we brought in, and other organizations too, for that matter, even some on the private side, where they brought in leadership to the exercise. And that way you got to hit that communication piece where, here's how we're going to communicate to our customers. Here's how we're going to communicate to parents when it's a school district. Here's how we're going to deal with the news, and fit those right into the exercise so that you can talk about some of those things you normally don't get a chance to and when you're doing everyday business activities and, addressing the fires at hand. In addition to that, oh, go ahead, Eric.
Well, I was just going to say there's one question that stood out. It was, what should small districts with limited resources work on first to best keep staff and students safe? it'll be interesting to see what Bill comes up with. I would say, if nothing else, start with MFA. And the reason why is we've had several incidents where had MFA been fully implemented in the school districts, especially, the incidents would not have rose to the level of needing external support if it would have turned into an incident at all. I know that there's some climate issues, in terms of dealing with change, dealing with maybe folks who find it inconvenient. How do you socialize that among your students as well? But I would just encourage you to look for colleagues maybe in other districts who have fully implemented MFA and pick their brains about how they went about doing that. I would say another place to start, especially if you are in a district where you might have some strong personalities in your district leadership. Limit the administrator accounts only to those IT personnel who really have a need to be an administrator. Because just wanton software installations can be a real easy threat surface for bad actors, and that's another area where we've seen some easily mitigatable incidents where you've got a finance director who had administrative rights to install software that I'm sure there was a business purpose at some point, but long story short, by limiting that type of access, it can shore up your internal security and reduce risk that way. Bill, what would you say?
Well, great points, Eric. Ray threw in a question in the chat that I want to address. He asked, what is the difference between SciHi service and RPT remote penetration test that CISA has? The best way to describe that, Ray, is that the remote pen test is a team that comes in and they spend 6 to 8 weeks, or they don't come in, sorry, they remotely test your network from the outside looking in. SciHi is just an automated scan that looks for vulnerabilities, so it's an automated tool. When we do the remote pen test, they go a lot deeper. They actually do physical hands-on keyboard. They do some of the same automated steps. If you're a SciHi customer, they will look at your reports to see what's vulnerable from that aspect. And then in addition to that, they will try to see if they can actually exploit some of those things. So just test to see if you've got other controls in place that will keep it from happening, because you might have mitigating controls that address those things. And they also do one that I really like, which is they'll test your defenses against some of the payloads that can come through email. So those phishing things where they try to get you to click on an attachment and such. They'll send you some payloads that aren't actually dangerous, but should trigger your security tools. They'll test it to see if your email filtering catches it, or perhaps it makes it all the way into the endpoint and your endpoint detection software catches the issue. But they'll test those things with various payloads and then give you a nice report that shows you, what weaknesses you might want to address. With the pen test, it also is a nice thing from the perspective of if they run across something that's really dangerous, they will stop testing immediately and contact you and have a discussion about that so that it can be addressed right away. They won't wait for the report. So it's a cool service. It's a little harder to get. I'm proud to say that in Wisconsin, we've been getting more than our fair share because other states have not been getting the requests that we have. So we've been stealing them from other states as well. So it's kind of nice that we're more forward leaning in Wisconsin than some of the other states around us. So, but great question, Ray. Thank you for asking that. And then in addition to that, I should also talk about there's one other level of testing that we do. So it kind of goes with the assessments with me and Dan, where we talk about your program and we answer yes and no questions, like our ransomware readiness assessment. Uh, that's just having a discussion with you about what practices you should have in place and, various levels depending on which assessment we choose. Those are a great place to start, uh, along with the sci-high scanning, so you know what is vulnerable from the outside looking in. But then after you've done those, then we can do these things like the remote pen testing or the risk and vulnerability assessment, which is another form of a pen test. That one is a 2-week engagement that has 1 week of remote pen testing and then it's 1 week on site. The week on site, they actually put a device inside your network and then look to see what a perpetrator could get at if they made it past your outer defenses or if you had an internal threat. So for K-12 schools, students are usually a big threat. But for other organizations, it could be a disgruntled employee or could be a nation state brought in a contractor and injected them in. But there's lots of possibilities. The RVA gets at that. The thing I like about the RVA is it's also one that our Wisconsin Cyber Response Team members have done some training for, and we're looking to maybe build more capacity for that in the future. That's kind of a work in progress at this point. So I won't say too much more about that because I don't want to put Eric on the spot for that. But it is a cool thing. And yeah, I think we've got all of those caught up then in the chat. So sorry about that, Eric.
It's okay. I want to just real quick address the there's some not really questions, but just sort of topical prompts regarding preparedness and planning. I just wanted to address. So if your district or library or organization would like assistance with incident response planning or testing your plan through a tabletop or developing a more comprehensive preparedness plan so that you have a maintenance schedule that is easily adaptable to your organization, your operational context. This is an area where WEM actually shines as an organization. We do this for counties and municipalities in terms of providing assistance and guidance for those activities. And I'm happy to provide those same services to WiscNet members. And even if you have a plan in place, we can do a cursory plan review and identify areas that are definitely spot on, or also point out areas that might need to be shored up, or at least considered for shoring up. All of that consultation is free and it's confidential, so we don't post any information. It just stays between the network owner and those of us supporting your interests. So just to throw that out there, in addition to the assessments, in addition to the tabletop training and other types of activities. And I also like to throw out one last piece. If you are a CRT member, we do have resources available both internally and through the Homeland Security Grant Program to subsidize some cybersecurity training, in addition to our own quarterly training program that we do jointly with the Wisconsin National Guard. So, and we just recently approved our position task book that will allow for FEMA Type 2 and Type 1 cyber incident responders to be credentialed. And that passbook, really what it does is it documents the level of training and response activities for our members for that validation. So that's a huge step. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Bill, but Wisconsin might be the first state to actually to have that. We'll begin
I'm
doing
100% certain we are.
Well, we'll begin doing the audits later this summer. It's been about a year just to get that rolling. It'll be another year to get our first folks credentialed. But what's nice about that is that we're we're working to train our civilian volunteers at the same level that our National Guard partners are trained in terms of the DoD 8570 level 2 baseline knowledge, skills, and tasks. So that in and of itself, I think, is huge, because it means the level of training that we're building toward competency is recognized by DoD, and it just adds, a little bit more legitimacy to the kind of work that our incident responders are going to be able to do for the state.
Yeah. So Eric, going back to the things that I kind of put in the trends and threats category, because there's a few things that had been asked of us prior to the session today that we maybe didn't quite touch on yet. One of those I thought was an interesting one. It was the efforts to track and shut down hackers and foreign state supported hackers. This, I thought that was an interesting question, because it's truly not exactly in our lane, because we're more on the preparedness and prevention, and then if something bad happens, how do you get it figured out and recover it, so that incident response piece. But our partners go down that lane of going after the bad folks that are causing these troubles. And we have that relationship, which is the beauty of how Wisconsin works. And both on the federal law enforcement side as well as the state law enforcement side, partnerships with the cyber response team that can take that evidence and go after people. So one of the benefits of reporting things, so even if you guys have something that maybe it's a small incident and you don't really think it's worthy of reporting, I would say report it anyway, just in case. And if you're working with a cyber response team, we'll talk to you, but because you're always in charge of the incident, the cyber response team is just there to help. But if you want the cyber response team to help you get that information shared with partners, that can happen too. And the benefit to that is that evidence gets into a pile. So the FBI, for example, has a case file on all of the ransomware actors that are out there, or the groups, and they're tracking their activity. And sometimes they are able to do things to shut them down. It is a bit like playing whack-a-mole, though. So, as soon as you get one down, another one pops up. Our state fusion center has taken down, websites that have been malicious, and taken down email accounts that were being abused. So they have some ability to help with that as well. But the bottom line is, unless you report it, the information doesn't go anywhere. So highly recommend reporting it to one of the partners.
I put the IC3
homepage in the chat. Nice, very nice. Yeah, and if you don't want to do the FBI IC3, you can also do our WISC, or our State Fusion Center can take things from their online system as well. But I thought that was a great question, so I just want to make sure we touched on that. And then I think we hit on most everything else, at least tangentially, from the threat perspective. Other than we didn't actually make mention about the elections this year.
Well, I can touch on that, Bill, as well as the RNC. In terms of elections, one of the things just to keep in mind is that the Wisconsin Elections Commission, they have hardware and software standards for all of the 1,800 or so individual polling sites, and for the counties to be able to help facilitate those processes. I think where the main concern is has more to do with misinformation. So I think it's important that we understand that the hardware and software isn't really the real vulnerability. It's the human factors that go into what context at the local level is being created to maybe post incorrect polling place addresses or dates for early voting on social media sites. So And that's an area where I know that there's been some, uh, you know, activity with generative AI and bots and other things to help accelerate some of those uh, pieces. But um, with the RNC, I just wanted to mention the challenges it's likely to pose. It's important to understand that about 90% or so of the critical infrastructure, including cyber, is privately owned. So, you know, the activities that typically go with securing an event such as that is handled through the U.S. Secret Service and FEMA, FBI, and a lot of our state agency partners. We all have a piece to that. Um, in terms of who owns what, most of it is private. So those agencies that I mentioned are typically working directly with those um, um, network owners and other critical infrastructure owners. Um, and the planning is typically about a year in advance of the actual event. So, and there really isn't much that we can talk about with the planning process and things of that sort. But um, well, we do have a short list of cyber response team members who are able and capable of assisting any of the agencies that might request some additional cyber security analysts. So, I
So,
don't know, Bill,
so
if you have
Eric,
anything else to say about
what
that.
one of the so with the Republican National Convention and the elections this year, there's going to be a lot of attention on Wisconsin.
Hmm.
And so, like Eric said, we're working with the critical infrastructure partners in the area of the RNC. A lot of planning activities going on. The good news is we had a little bit of practice with this with the Democratic National Convention back in 20. So some of the plans we just dusted off, which is great. But uh, one of the things that happened cyber-wise last time around was there was perpetrators that were doing Google searches and then wanted to make a statement. So they found some places in Milwaukee that had their essentially their email addresses and all their contact information on the website without anything in front of it to make it hard to not just script it right. So no captchas, nothing. Uh, that caused a denial of service on their email accounts and their phones, which was very annoying. So that was one thing of interest. But related to elections, I put two things in the chat because denial of service was a common thing that they did back then. And I'm thinking with our counties in the state, especially, but also the municipalities. Eric said we've got 1,850 local elections that happen in our state every time there's an election, and they feed their information up. They maybe have websites too that tell voters where to come to vote and things like that. But then they feed the information up to the county, who posts the preliminary, and I say preliminary because they have not been certified at that point, but the preliminary results get posted to the county websites on election night. And that's where the press gets their information and their answers. So if those websites were to be down, that would be really problematic. So Cloudflare has this free service that they do that you can sign up for. Not part of CISA, not part of the CRT, just something that Cloudflare offers that can be signed up for to protect those websites from a denial of service attack. So that would go over above and beyond what WiscNet can do for you on the denial of service side. So it's a handy dandy resource to utilize. So recommend it, especially for the counties, but also for you that have a local election that can be useful from that standpoint too. If you're neither of those and you're interested in Cloudflare, on our resource link, there's also the free Cloudflare services that you can get for just anybody as well. Not sure what the difference between the two are because I haven't actually checked that out completely, but they're no cost, so no harm in getting signed up for them. I'll also put an additional resource link in here because we have a plethora of free resources out there, not just from CISA, but also from our partners, either open source or private sector companies that are offering things. And that link that I just posted now for the additional free resources is of great value too. So just wanted to throw that one in there, Eric.
Good deal.
All right, and we are at time here, actually, and I know we could keep going for another hour or two. These are all fantastic subjects and a very interesting conversation. Any last words, so to say, any last advices? And I know Steve put another question in chat,
Yeah.
Eric.
Yeah, I was going to mention that. So, I mean, I know that Ray also had a good reply to that. I think, first of all, I think that's an opportunity to train faculty and other staff about information security. And, even though, the type of data that a teacher, has isn't necessarily DoD classified, at any level, but it is sensitive information. And so having, simple practices to ensure that PII is safeguarded at all times as best as possible. So if a teacher is not at the workstation, lock the computer so that way, whatever documents were available or open aren't available to be seen by the students. If they're printouts, they have physical possession of those, keep them in a drawer if they're not really needing to be used. I mean, again, a lot of this might seem elementary, but again, it's a lot of these basic blocking and tackling types of measures that can exponentially safeguard information and protect you and your students and other stakeholders in terms of sensitive information being exfiltrated, whether it be, from a person's phone or whether it be taking a screenshot or what have you. So a lot of
Yeah.
this just to practice the basics.
And Steve, to more directly answer your question, so don't personally have tools to do that, what you're asking for, to track where the information went, but there are some things that come close, like data miner, and that would be something our Fusion Center might be able to help with in terms of just trying to help you research where things went. Because of the nature of it, they might not have time to help you with that, but there are some tools that can help discover things that are out there on the web. So I hope that answered your question. And then I love Ray's comment about Google and using their features to keep your logs too, because some of the incidents that we've responded to, we have actually used those Google logs, and they're quite useful. So great point, Ray. Thank you for throwing that in there. Lastly, just to wrap this up, Eric, because I know we're over time now. Probably the best thing you can do, because we didn't cover everything that we promised to today, is I put the contacts for me and Dan plus our protective security advisors. Eric, you might want. Did you paste yours in the chat too? Your contact?
I can do it right now. Yeah.
Yeah. So the bottom line is reach out to any of us anytime. And one thing that Dan and I like to do is we'll schedule a 1-hour Teams meeting with you, and we can just have a conversation about where you're at and what you need, and then try to figure out what things we have that might be helpful to you. We call it a cyber protective visit, but all it means is we're going to have it's just to sit down and have a conversation, figure out where you're at, figure out what we can provide to help. And that's the same price as everything we do. You've already paid for it with assuming you all pay taxes. You've already paid for it. So feel free to just ping us and say, hey, like to talk with you about what you can do for us, and we'll set some time up and take care of that.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you, Eric and Bill, for all the information. And once again, it was all recorded and all the links and everything, so it will be emailed to everyone who registered. Couple quick words about the next Teach and Learn, which will take place on March 21st, and it will be with Teach updates, and we'll hear from Matt Yaki and some other technical representatives, and we'll talk about what's new on that network, what updates were made, and all the other good stuff. So put it in your calendar and watch for emails with links, March 21st. All right, and with that, I want to say again, thank you to everyone who participated, to our membership for all the questions, and for Bill and Eric. Reach out to us if you would like us to put you in contact with them, or also their wonderful emails in chat. And enjoy your February.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having us here today. Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, folks.